Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Briefly, and most often when we say briefly, we don't mean briefly, but I will try and be brief. You know, sitting through these debates the past decade plus in this committee and on the House floor, I know we have a statute, but I'm still not convinced we really have a death penalty in the first place. What we have is an obtuse, a flawed, an impractical, and unworkable so-called death penalty. We have a death penalty under which, in the last 50 years, we've executed but one criminal. And few of us really believe that any of the 11 on death row will ever be put to death. Certainly, if this bill passes, those 11 will never be put to death, and that's something that we ought to be honest about. Even though we're carving them out, they have an appeal issue that I dare say no appellate court would overlook, and we should be honest when we're talking about repealing the death penalty. Representative Shaven is correct. If we are to have a death penalty, we need a real death penalty, one that's fair, one that's just, and one that works for the victim's family, for the state, and for the correction system, for society. I think most everyone on both sides would agree that our current death penalty statute does not function well, whatever you think of the death penalty itself. Either we ought to have a real death penalty or none at all. Regardless what we do today, amendments, excuse me, such as those offered by Senator Kissel, Senator Rohrabaugh, but especially Senator Kissel's, ought to be looked at and adopted as this moves forward. As a matter of justice, I think that would be appropriate. I sincerely hope, as the co-chair said and others on the committee said, that they will look into this with an open mind, and if language needs to be tweaked and worked out, so be it. I'd also like to note with some sadness that year after year we go through this exercise. Whether or not this paper tiger of a death penalty we have, under which we've only executed one criminal in the past 50 years, and under which we may never execute another, ought to be repealed. At the same time, the legislature does this session after session, year after year. It pays practically no mind to the nearly 40 unborn babies killed every day in this state. Comes to thousands a year, thousands and thousands a year in this state. We can spend all the time we want talking about whether or not we're going to execute the worst of the worst, but take the most innocent, and we're embarrassed, and we don't even talk about that. It makes us uncomfortable, and we don't want to discuss that. That ought not be. Nothing's more innocent than an unborn child. In part, in an effort to promote a culture of life, that we ought to value all human life, all the life that God has put on this earth, all human life. I'm going to support the repeal today. I do think we ought to look into the amendments as said, but goodness, I wish that we would balance things out a bit, and once we perhaps finish up keeping the worst of the worst from the ultimate punishment and the ultimate justice, we can do some justice for the unborn. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative O'Neill.